We're good to go.
Okay, it's 5:45 and I'll call the work session to order.
Okay, we are officially gavelled in. Thank you, Director Carson. So, good evening. Thank you all for coming tonight. I appreciate it. Thanks to the Budget Committee for your service and willingness to join us in this project. Thanks to the board for your service. I know you've had quite a few weeks, and here you are again, so I appreciate it. I see you've got a cup of coffee. That's probably much needed. So, before we do quick introductions, I just wanted to kind of give an overview of what tonight looks like and what you can expect tonight and from us next in our meeting a week from tomorrow. So tonight is really a fiscal update and just kind of a brief overview of the budget to give you a sense of where things are. In the past, we've done this meeting in small groups. Experienced budget committee members who've been here for a while will remember that. We've sat and gone through it in small groups, provided good discussion. I think that served us pretty well. Got a good look at going deep into the budget, but what it didn't do was allow the public to see what that conversation looked like. And so this year we decided to try something different and have any conversations about budget be in the public setting. And so we're trying to do a different tack this year and see how that works for us. So we also have some new members on our committee. And so tonight, not being an official budget committee meeting, we'll go at the next one, which is an official budget committee meeting where we actually receive the budget and you'll have a chance to vote to adopt it if you choose, or to approve it, should you choose so. We'll spend a little bit of time talking more formally about what the role of the budget committee and things like that is, just so you know. So Jim, we're going to start with you, so be ready. We're going to go ahead and do introductions really quickly. So people in the district, obviously your name and what you do for the district, and budget committee members, your name and whatever, if anything else you want to share with us.
I'm Jim Rose, Chief Operations Officer, so I have technology, facilities and maintenance, custodial, technology, print shop, food services, and testing.
Awesome. Ryan Dunlap. So I think I've been with the budget committee like 3 years now, 3-ish years. It's been fun. I signed up to do it again, so I'm excited to help out working.
Nice. Brian Boatsman, CPA at a local firm, and I'm also our COO. We've got 3 boys in the district, 2 that go to Foxview over here, and 1 in middle school.
I'm Matt Kaufman. This is my 3rd year on the budget committee. We have a current first grader and an incoming over at Nicholson.
I'm Marlene Carroll. I'm the assistant superintendent here in Chile.
Tom Smoller, school board, first year.
Jeremy Lyons, superintendent, and I just want to thank the budget committee members for your willingness to serve. It's, dry work, to say the least. But
Hey.
That's really good work.
That's right.
These are all financial people.
I'm gonna say, all around the day. I'm just being honest. I mean, it's not, it's this isn't the football committee. But I really do appreciate you being here and voting. It's very important. Very, very much.
Do we have a football committee that we?
Let's go.
The budget approved.
Harmony Carson, school board, my 2nd year.
Steve Everett, I'm the executive director of human resources, and this is my 8th year in this job, 17th year.
Matt Jordan, school board, first year.
Derek Thomas, the budget committee, 2nd year, and I've got my last kid who's graduating here from Sherwood High School, so that's and 3 kids come through the program.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Gary Bennett, this is my 2nd year as CFO, and I think my 15th year in the district.
Christine Andrig, board secretary and assistant to the superintendent, and this is my 6th year here.
Okay, thank you for that. So we'll just jump right in here. Let's see, what do I?
Here we are expecting 1 more member to attend, but it's running a bit late.
Okay, now it's working. Okay, we're on track. So tonight, these are the things we'll talk about. We'll take a look at this year and how we're doing this year. I think it's important to follow up on that. We'll take a look at an overview of the budget for next year. We'll take a look at enrollment and revenue projections, a little bit of expenditure projections, talk a little bit about risks and opportunities, and we'll just talk about where we are in the process of this whole thing. So the first thing is really taking a look at where we are for this year. And as an overview, this was a really good year for the Sherwood School District financially. What could have been a terrible year for us turned out to be a pretty good one. We received about $5.8 million in levy funding. It was new to the district, and that's all money that we get to keep, goes straight to our kids, which is really, really cool. We're pretty much going to double our general fund reserves from about $1 million to about $2 million. On top of that, we're going to pay down. We had some sub-fund deficits in our 200 funds in excess of $1 million in athletics and Medicaid paying in the bus replacement fund, and we will pay all those to zero this year, in addition to building our general fund reserve. So that's really another type of reserve we're building. So really, really good years. Our payroll continues to track a little bit under budget, which is good. That's 85% of our money. And so when that continues to track well, that means good things for the district, generally speaking. So all that's really good news. We did have some challenges this year. And by the way, if you have questions, this is more of a discussion than a presentation. So just jump in, ask questions, make comments, whatever you need to do to make sure you get a good sense of it. We did have some compression on our levy. We've talked about this before, but when the gap between assessed value and real market value comes too close together on certain properties, that means we can't collect tax on those properties due to some really complex and technical tax laws in the state of Oregon. Bad news is we're not going to get that $700,000 back. The good news is it's going to stay stable according to the analysis that we had done. Our financial advisor actually did about a $30,000 pro bono analysis for us and looked at every single property in the district individually to check out its individual compression. And so we know we're in pretty good shape. Whereas before we chose not to pay for that because we honestly thought there'd be a lot less compression. So they did that for us for nothing. So that was good news. But it is a challenge that we lost some revenue there. Our purchase service budget is forecast to run over budget. Some of that is cost overruns. And some of that is the ice storm we had, where it looks like it's overrunning its budget, which it is overrunning its budget, but we're gonna have $500,000 or more expenses in the ice storm to be reimbursed by our insurance company. And so a lot of that money's already gone out the door. We got our first check from insurance actually this afternoon that covered our first draw to the contractor. So that's part of the reason that that's over budget. Part of it is we've just had some cost overruns. And I think maybe our biggest challenge is that we have declining enrollment. We lost about 30 students this year. Also, our numbers of students who are navigating poverty, we get extra funds for them. And those numbers drop substantially. And so when it says 7580 MW up there, that's average daily membership weighted. And that weighted means for certain kids and groups of kids, we get an extra weight. And so we lost 7580 MW this year, and then about $10,000 a pop. That's a pretty good chunk of money. Now, fortunately for us this year, schools are funded on one of two ways. Either your enrollment from last year or your enrollment from the current year. So our enrollment dropped this year, but our funding level stayed essentially the same because we sort of have a safe harbor there. Next year, enrollment becomes a bigger risk for us because that safe harbor has dropped by 75 kids. That makes sense.
Based on this year.
It'll be based on the hire of this year or next year.
Got it.
And we'll talk a little bit more later about what we're talking about next year, but enrollment is a risk and an opportunity for us in some pretty significant ways.
And Gary, on the reimbursable expenses on the ice cream, those were for facility that impacts damages, right? Not overtime or extra time involved clearing sidewalks and things like that.
They're going to compensate us for obviously all the facilities damage that goes to the contractors that did the work. And they're also going to compensate our staff, us for the staff. We paid our staff to do things like box up Middleton and move it to come in on a Saturday and box up their classrooms and move it over to Ridges. And so they're going to compensate us for that time as well. And we're in negotiations about exactly what they're going to pay us for. Might be a stretch, but we're emailing back and forth and I'm giving him new numbers and he's telling me what he likes and we're working on it. Okay. But that's good news that they're paying us for that. So when Dr. Lyon was out there shoveling the sidewalk, we'll get compensated for his time.
We can go, let's go.
That's what the plan is.
But real quick, with regards to enrollment, do we still have open enrollment for other districts?
We do.
Okay.
We do, and we're tracking. I can't remember the exact numbers. We have kids coming in and out, and we have more kids coming in and out, but the gap is not as big as it's been in the past.
Okay.
And part of that challenge students, the way the law works is the board actually has to vote to allow students in and to allow students out. And so when we vote to allow students in, you could come from another district and we could allow you to come in, but that school district has to release. And as student enrollment's been dropping across the region, districts seem less likely to approve those than they have been in the past. So we have a lot of people who've applied but haven't been able to seal the deal with a letter from the other district. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah. So this is our financials. This is just a financial summary. It's from March 31. This packet had to be turned in by,
Can I ask one more?
yeah, sure.
About the declining enrollment. So we, just to make sure I'm understanding, right? So we would lose state funding if our drop is more significant than the overall drop in enrollment. So if we lost 5% of our students, but statewide, there were 5% fewer students.
We would probably be even.
We would be even, right? So,
Well, let me think about that math, but conceptually, yes, it might not work out exactly to even.
so do we have numbers on where we stack out versus what's projected?
Yeah, I'll talk about that. I have some,
Oh, sorry.
I don't have the statewide. Statewide is a tricky one because they project statewide enrollment based on my estimate of our enrollment and every other business manager across the state's enrollment. And, you know, all of us sort of, I'll show you the kind of the details of our enrollment forecast this year. It is an imperfect science at best. And so that's what they base the state number on. And that's another risk for us, depending on how everybody estimates. Does the pie stays the same for the state school funding? How many kids are in the pie changes? And that causes swings in our revenue that move around pretty good. And they don't actually reconcile it. We got the reconciliation for 22-23 school year last week. That's when they'll finally close that book up. By the time they get audited financials from every district, that's when they close that. They reconcile that the following year. So
they.
yeah, we can, yeah.
And the original number that was proposed for that 22-23 year was proposed back in spring of 21, correct?
Winter of 21. I've turned that in January. I turned in my estimate for next year, January 15th of this year. So 9 months before the kids show up, everybody's scratching their head trying to figure out how many kids are going to walk in the door, and then ODE bases its estimate on that. I mean, I don't know of a better system, right? But it's an imperfect science.
Yeah.
Which again is one of the reasons we need to build our reserves, because these swings in enrollment you just can't project. You can try your best, but sometimes you're right, sometimes you're wrong, sometimes it goes your way, sometimes it goes the other way. So this is just our published financial statement from March. This packet had to be turned in so it could be released to the public. I had to turn it on May 7th, and I just did not have time to do a thorough analysis of the April financial, so that's why it's dated. But the good news here is that this top line number seems to be holding pretty steady. My pointer's not showing up on the TV. At 1.9, at almost $2 million in ending fund balance in the annual forecast, the column one from the left, one from the right. And that's nearly double what we started the year with at $945,000. So that's good news, and it seems to be tracking pretty steady. I've done a little bit of analysis of the April financials, and it looks to be about the same. I think I had it up about $7,000, but it's right in that same neighborhood. So that's good news.
Gary, we've been joined by.
Yes, I should have been. I'm sorry, I was talking away. You must be Ben. Hi, Ben. Thank you for joining us. No problem. Jim told me we were going to be a couple minutes late, so we were prepared for that. Welcome to the budget committee, and maybe we can touch base for a couple minutes afterwards, and I'll introduce myself. But we appreciate your service. Thanks for reminding me of my manners, Dr. Lyon. I was just so excited.
I know.
I know this is dry to some people, but to some of us, it's very exciting. So
It's riveting over here.
Try is good.
yeah, when finances are boring, it's an okay thing. Okay.
Gary, one more quick clarifying question. So do we have a target ending fund balance percentage?
We have a board policy that was passed this year. We never had one before. We passed one this year that is it asks us, the board has directed us essentially to work towards getting to 8%. So we have a plan to get there by 2027 is sort of the plan we laid out to increase by incrementally each year until we get there. So that's the plan. And that's probably on the low end of. That's what ODE recommends and OSBA recommends. A lot of districts have higher than that, a lot have lower. It kind of depends. So these are our special revenue funds. This is where all of our grant funds essentially sit. There's some other funds that sit in here. Student body funds sit in here. Construction excise tax funds sit in here. There's a few other funds that sit in here. It's more or less a pass-through account. It does have a ending fund balance, but this is where our grants sit, and it supports a large number of staff and operations. And more so every year. We get more and more funding from grants every year and less as a percentage wise from the state. And the new money they do give us comes in the form of grants. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's so that they can direct us to use that money in research-based ways that will be more likely to raise student achievement. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, but we do see a lot of the new funding we receive coming into this fund in the form of grants. This is our debt services fund. This is where we pay two types of bonds out of. One is just our general obligation bonds, where we borrowed money to build the new high school and turn this into a district office. We also we have a PERS bond, where essentially we took out a bond and gave the money to PERS, betting that the PERS rate of return would beat what we paid on the bond in a low interest rate time. That was about 20 years ago, and that's turned out to be a good investment for the district. And that bond will expire, I think, in 2026 or 2027. It's coming up pretty soon. So there's a whole other piece of that we'll have to talk about at a later time. And our capital projects fund, this is mostly the remaining bond funds we have left. And the funds in here are put aside for maintenance, capital needs, curriculum and technology are the main things that sit in this fund. And so we have a fairly healthy ending fund balance in there, although the funds are, dwindling over time and they are finite. The biggest bulk of funds in there is actually set aside for technology. For one, they had the biggest chunk of money because it was just an expensive thing to take us to 1-to-1. And our tech director wrote a $1.5 million federal grant during the pandemic, which essentially bought us a whole free cycle of computers for everybody in the district and every kid in the district. So that was a really good deal for us, and that really will extend our bond dollars by a full replacement cycle, or about 5 years. So that's good news. Any questions about those? Okay. Let's get on to the next year. Really our strengths. The local option levy continues to be just a real strength for the district. It's always nice being in the second year of a biennium, because you have a pretty good sense of what the state school fund is. We get a budget over 2 years. We get 49% in the first year and 51% in the second year of the biennium. The good news is we know what we have. The bad news is we get 4% more than we had last year, and our costs are going to go up by more than 4%. So that's just the way it goes. So that's a challenge we face. The good news is the economic forecasts continue to be pretty strong out of Salem. There's another one coming out in the next few days. I should know the date off the top of my head, but there's another one coming out. But they have been strong, showing robust tax collections and things, and that should mean the legislature has a good amount of money to work with. The $1.3 billion jackpot didn't hurt either.
Yeah.
That's like $130 million in tax revenue for the state, or something crazy like that. And I think more important than any of that, joking aside, is that we'll talk about this in a minute, but our enrollment is expected to grow over the next few years, according to our demographer. And that's the first time they've told us that in a long time. And so that's really good news. And it has to do largely with the development, and we continue to have a really good capture rate of kids. We collect a lot of kids. We get almost one kid for every new single family residence that's built. And that's really good compared to local districts. That's a good rate. And so that development is really going to help us out. Challenges, we'll talk a little bit more about changes to the classified unemployment law. I showed you those bond funds on there depleting. As those bond funds deplete, we're going to have to support capital expenditures out of our general fund. We set aside 10 years when we went out for that bond 10 years ago. We set aside 10 years of funds for capital goods, and that's going to run out. And so you'll see in the budget later on today that there's some transfers into some reserve funds for like turf field replacement, bus replacement, curriculum, technology, not technology, curriculum, other things like that. And we're going to have to start saving money now, and we're going to have to ramp that up each year so that not only does it become a part of our not only do we save money for when the bond funds run out, but so we have a line item built into our budget to accommodate it, so we don't just hit a shock in that way. Generally, just like you at home, our expenses continue, well, I don't know what your revenue situation is at home, so I'll speak for most people. But expenses continue to rise faster than the money coming in, and that's just a constant pressure, just kind of squeezing us a little bit. And one of those costs is property and liability costs continue to increase dramatically, 20% last year and 20% again this year, more or less. And when your insurance is $700,000 or $800,000, it's a pretty good chunk of money. And that has to do with just the pooled risk that insurance companies face. A hurricane in Florida affects insurance rates everywhere. And on top of that, we've had two pretty good local events. The ice storm cost our local insurance company, PACE, who all school districts use, a fair bit of money. And then we had the wildfire just a couple of years ago. So there's been pretty significant expenditures, and the rates are definitely reflecting that. Okay, taking a look at revenue. Here's just a big picture look at our revenue forecast for next year. Our total resources are up about 5.98%. Part of that's because we've doubled our projected beginning fund balance next year. Our operating revenues are up more like 4.5%. And that includes some optimism around enrollment growth and some other things that we're going to have to go well for us to hit our revenue target. Speaking of enrollment, I just want to walk through with you. This is an important enough calculation that I really want everyone here and everyone who's interested enough to watch this presentation, how we calculate enrollment, because this is a big number for us because it drives our revenue. So the first thing we take a look at is live births. And if you look back 5 years ago, what our live births were, there was 243 live births in 2019, and those kids will enroll in kindergarten in 2024-25. So then what you can do is you can look back historically and you can see, well, what percentage of those live births ended up enrolled in our kindergarten classes, and you can make some projection. And last year the projection was 273 and we opened at 273, so we actually got lucky last year to be right on the number. We're at 279 right now, so that's grown over the course of the year. Next year we're projecting a larger number. My eyes aren't good enough. 293 or 298? 293. Thank you for your help. Don't laugh at me. Yeah. So then you take that kindergarten class of 293 and you plug it in, and then we grow. We tend to see this typical growth pattern, and the pandemic disrupted it a little bit. We tend to see this growth pattern where we have 340 kindergartners, they become 346 the next year, the pandemic blows it up, then they become 321, 339, 347, 367. And that's a typical pattern for us that you'll see across grade levels. So when you add in the new kindergarten class and roll those numbers up on a historical basis, that puts us at 4650, which is about 40 kids more than we're at this year. So that's good news. So then our demographers take a similar approach, but a lot more complex, and they bring development and other factors into it. And they actually go out and they talk to the city and they look at when stuff's going to come be built. And then they look at across the city, how many kids from a multifamily unit do we get? How many kids from a single family dwelling do we get? And then they take those projected houses that come online, and they're telling us we're going to be at 4708 next year, which is 100 kids higher than this year. And I'll believe it when they walk in the door, and I'm hoping they all do. So the number we actually picked was 4670.
So based on the demographers' conversations with the city, does that include Sherwood West at this point, or does it not?
It does not. They only include things likely to come on, things that I think are permitted or far enough down the road. And they don't really put anything in more than 5 years down the road. So Sherwood West is not included in that. And so if you look at their 10-year projection, it goes like this and comes back down starting right at 5 years, because they just basically put no future development in that outside of 5 years. So our number goes up for the next 5 years. So our number was 4650. Theirs was 4710. We went with 4670. So 20 above ours and 40 below theirs. And they have been plus or minus 40 kids the last 2 years in the post-pandemic era. 1 year they were 40 kids too low, 1 year they were 40 kids too high. So we looked kind of at our estimate and the outer limits of their estimate, and that's how we picked 4670. Right, wrong, or indifferent, that was the methodology.
Sound.
Seems to make sense,
Yeah,
right?
it
So
makes
then
sense.
we'll see who actually shows up. So enrollment is one of our biggest risks going forward. If enrollment, you're gonna see this budget actually calls for some reductions. And if we end up with enrollment below that target, it will require additional reductions, and we'll have to watch that really carefully. We've already started tracking data on next year's enrollment. But that is a risk for us. And we have some other risks going forward too that are just worth noting, and that's not in this year, but in future years. Our PERS rates are anticipated to go up a couple percent next year. And we're also going into a legislative session next year, and so we have a totally unknown amount of money. There is a lot of pressure on legislators right now to fund schools, maybe more than I've seen in the recent years. Gives me a little bit of reason for optimism. But all of those things are risks we're gonna have to manage going forward. And the most immediate being enrollment. Any questions about that? Because that's kind of a big one.
Can't remember in the past, what was our estimate versus David demographics? Was it that much difference? I felt like in the past it was a little bit tighter between the two estimates.
It's been a little bit tighter in the past. Yeah, it has, but there have been times that it's varied by that much.
Okay.
I think part of it is, one piece of it is that there's a large housing complex going in Tualatin. It's gonna, they think, bring us about 50 kids. And so our forecast that just looks at history doesn't bring in something like that. And so I think it maybe development is driving that change. But I don't know.
Yeah.
And theirs is a lot more sophisticated than ours. Ours is just based on a statistical history, which is actually proven sort of remarkably accurate for just the simplicity of it.
They actually divide our community into like 120 different little zones. And they're doing an analysis of in and outs for every grade within each of those zones. So it's quite a complex algorithm that they use.
Yeah, it is. It's pretty, the report is fairly lengthy and detailed.
Oh, Gary, real quickly, this tracking, I guess with the audience as well. You mentioned that there's development going on in Tualatin. Obviously, how does that bring us kids? And obviously, I know that there are some busing situations we set up to bring kids in maybe from other districts. Is that how we get those kids from a kind of next door neighbor district?
That's a good question. If you can, our boundary happens to be on the wall over there, but you can see our boundary crosses all the way over I-5.
This blue line. We have a massive school district that bleeds out all over the place. And there's I-5. So we're all over to the east of I-5.
That goes back to the day when, before Walton High School was built.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And like early to 90s building. And so my husband grew up on that side that we call them the Norwood kids. And they are busted and they get on the bus at like 6:30 in the morning. And they come on over. Yeah, but never letting that.
So they're technically in Tualatin, but they're in the Sherwood district.
Correct.
Okay.
And we have kids with Newburgh addresses, Sherwood addresses, Tualatin addresses, all attend our schools, and then we interact actually with all those different agencies when we collect construction excise taxes. We collect them from Tualatin, we collect them from Sherwood, we collect them from Washington County, we collect them from Clackamas County, we collect them from Yamhill County. We span all 3 counties and 2 cities. So it's sort of a interesting governmental overlay.
Jim, the map just takes.
Was that your idea?
It was not my idea, but I did make sure it got
That's
printed.
good.
Dr. Lyons.
Talk about a good place.
We need a map.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful.
So good question. You're the first one to call out our new map.
Okay.
That's excellent. It's like we planned that. I need you to ask a question about boundaries today. Okay. So other factors affecting revenue, there's really one big one. And it's a little bit complicated. It has to do, Matt, with what you and I were just talking about earlier about the reconciliation from the prior year. And so we estimate our transportation expenditures again in January of the year before. So for next year, I estimated our transportation expenditures for next year. And then they pay us throughout the year based on that. Then we turn into the end of the year what our actual transportation expenditures are, and they shore that up. And our transportation grant has been too high for years. And I didn't really understand how too high it was. We just got our reconciliation for 22-23. I figured it out in time to budget for it and account for it in the forecast. But it was about $500,000 last year of state school fund money that came out of this year to pay that deficit for next year, and it was too high this year, and we've got to shrink it down. Basically, what we were doing is we were taking money and paying it back in the following year, and that's been a pattern that's gone on for years around this grant, and we just need to shore it up. But it's going to cost us at some point in time. You have to pay last year's debt and this year's debt. That makes sense. So that's going to lower our revenue forecast by nearly $500,000 this year. Does that make sense to people how that works?
Yep.
It's kind of a complex reconciliation. So when we look at expenditure projections, we built a budget with a 3% COLA for both our certified and classified staff. We are currently in negotiations with our certified staff, our teaching staff. And whenever we've been in negotiations, when we're building a budget, we've always used the same thing for our cost of living allowance for budgets. And that's whatever they had the prior year, whatever currently in their contract, that's what we built the budget on. And the reason we do that is because we don't want to infuriate them by building a budget with a 1% COLA. And we don't want to, build it with we want to build it at just a consistent number that just doesn't play into negotiations at all. They understand that we're all on the same page about that, and that's how we do it. In addition to the 3% COLA, teachers who aren't on the top of the salary schedule move up a salary step every year. So they get the COLA plus a step on the salary schedule. And so that costs us about another 1.5%. We built in healthcare costs at 3%, escalation of materials and services generally at 4%, although some are higher than that. And then there's some additions and reductions we'll go through real quickly here. Well, not really quickly.
Gary, just to make sure, on the transportation reconciliation, so that's just a one-time true up, right? So that's just expected to be a one-time.
It's mostly a one-time true up. We may have a little bit more carry over into the next year. Depends on how our transportation costs come in. I suspect there will be a little bit of carrying over into the next year. I think we'll get it fully in 2 years, but most of it in 1 year. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And that true up is also true of like property taxes. Like we estimate our property taxes and it all goes into the same fund. And if we collect more than we think, they take more money from us the following year. It's sort of it's a cycle we haven't done well on historically, and we need to change that around. This is another factor affecting our bottom line quite a bit. There was a change in unemployment law that passed in the most recent legislative session. And what it does is it allows our classified staff who work less than 12 months to claim unemployment. And if they all claim unemployment, that could cost us up to $800,000, which is what we budgeted for it. We didn't want to be light on it. We wanted to make sure we covered the cost. I know there's been some frustration around this law. I just want to make it really clear from the district's perspective. Our challenge is not with our classified employees about this law. They're just the hardworking folks who drive the buses, fix the roofs, serve the lunches, work with some of our most difficult kids, work in the fiscal department. The challenge that I have personally, and I think I can speak for the district, is that this is unfunded. And so when this new law comes in and there's no funding that comes with it, it acts as a reduction for school districts.
And we're in a business, as we all know, that isn't exactly seasonal, but we need that classified staff, bus drivers, when the kids are here. So we went down that road looking at, well, what would it take to take a 9-month or a 10-month employee and offer full-time enrollment? And that, it turns out, is not easy to do because you have to offer like work. And so there's all these entanglements that make it very problematic. And it's difficult to fit this new legislation into the way that school districts have operated regarding the help needed when the students are there. And that's what we're trying to grapple with.
Has there been an update on, I know that last time it came up during the last update, and it was very new, and people are still kind of wrapping their minds around. Is there any update from Salem about whether or not this was intended or unintended?
I haven't, there's been no update from Salem. Nothing came out of the short session with it. I don't know if they'll take it up in the long session or not. And I do know that really no district I've found has been able to find a way to hire people in a meaningful way that saves them money, because when they collect unemployment, it costs us about half, a little more than half of what they make in wages, but there's no benefits on it. And so that saves up that, it just drives, it's like twice as expensive to hire somebody. So if we have meaningful work that needs to be done, it makes sense to hire people. But it certainly doesn't make sense financially to create jobs for people to try to keep them occupied and from claiming unemployment. Does that answer your question? So just a look at some of the cost drivers outside of our control. And when I talked about our revenue increasing by 4%, but our expenses increasing faster, these are just some of the cost drivers. Classified unemployment, which I talked about, our insurance premium increase at 187 grand, just electricity, like 50 something grand, and that's only like a 5% or 6% increase. And then 3 PE teachers, there's a law that mandates the minimum number of PE minutes that a kid has to have every week. And we have kicked that can down the road farther than we should have, and as far as we can, and we have to meet those minutes next year. And to do that, we had to hire 4 PE teachers. We got a grant that pays for one of them. And so that these 3 are in our general fund. One will be paid for a grant, and that other one's coming into the general fund next year as that grant expires. We're kind of negotiating with ODE to see if they'll let us have the grant for a second year. I don't know. We're trying to be a big enough pain that they just finally get tired of us.
How long is that grant funded for the one teacher?
Well, it was supposed to be for this current year and next year, a teacher in each year, but we didn't get the grant until February.
Yeah.
So there was no way to go hire a PE teacher and change our schedule in February. So what we're trying to do is have them pay for one next year, and instead of having it be this year and next year and the year after. And
Because it's a biennium. The department at the regional spread things over into another biennium, so maybe we can work on some plan for extension.
yeah, we haven't been told no yet, despite several requests.
Yeah.
We also have not been told yes.
Then just for in case and kind of curious, so what does that mean? As far as like PE for students, so the increase in teachers
Means more PE.
across the board, or is it? Is it
For K5,
Yeah.
K5, and they'll go to 3 days.
So they will have a rotation schedule, essentially, where they'll do STEM 1 day, music 1 day, PE 2 days, and then PE on the Wednesday. And their rotations will be between 50 and 55 minutes, so much longer sessions. And that also means our classroom teachers will have an extended prep period to get, and they can do meetings if they want during that time. So it'll kind of be a little bit cleaner of a schedule all around.
Yeah, we had a
That's fine.
PE that's middle level in 2 years, but so I don't think so we have that.
Yeah. And then we'll be in compliance as well.
But that's at least, I mean, that's at least good news for it, you know, some of these other cost drivers, you don't really get anything, but everybody will be very, as a parent of elementary students, they'll be very excited.
Kids need to
Your
move.
longer specials during the day.
Yeah, it'll be great. It's not that it's a bad thing, it's just an added cost. And we're fortunate, some districts had to build like gymnasiums to be able to pull this off. They just didn't have the physical plant to be able to do it. So,
And Gary, on the classified unemployment piece, I know last time when we talked about it, we were still kind of sizing some of that up, and you proposed kind of what you thought was the upper bound of risk. Is this 800 kind of that upper bound, or are we still undetermined on what that's going to look like?
well, we decided to budget the full estimate if all claimed it. So hopefully that's not what it comes out to be, but we just didn't want any risk there, and
So that is the upper.
that is the upper end. That's the upper end of what it could be, and so we just don't know how it's gonna shake out.
Yeah.
We'll have a pretty good idea after summer, because I think that's when the bulk of the claims would come, and so. Whatever period. Into September, into that quarter, we'll probably get a pretty good sense of. What that looks like.
And in case anyone doesn't know, our classified employees are those who are paid an hourly rate, so this doesn't include like our teaching staff, salary.
Thank you for that clarification. So we did, we had some positions in the budget that were not hired or put in play last year in the special education budget for a variety of reasons. And so we converted some of those unhired staff into some new sped staff, which we greatly needed, special education staff. When I say sped, special education staff. And so these are not really additions because they were in the budget last year. They are an addition that they weren't in our spending forecast for this year, if that makes sense, but they were in the budget, but they're not in like our forecast expenditures for salaries this year. But so these are reallocation of unspent positions. So we're adding 2.7 positions in special education, which is much needed and a good move by our.
Can you tell us what SLP is and SCS, what that actually is?
Yes, sorry. An SLP is a speech and language pathologist. So we're adding, we had a speech and language pathologist assistant. That person resigned from her position. And so we converted that and another classified staff member into a licensed speech language pathologist. And SCS is Sherwood Charter School. We have a charter school in town that's across the street from the old district offices, I think most of you know. And we provide special education services to all their kids. And the caseload over there is growing. And so we took a 0.8 FTE position, made it a full-time position over there. Thank you. I'll help with this one too. A dual language immersion instructional assistant is the top one. These are other additions that we made. We have a dual language immersion program at Hawksview, as I think many of you probably know. And those classrooms get a little bit of extra support. And so we started in 2020 with our kindergartners, who will be fourth graders next year. Hard to believe it's happened so fast. And so each year we need to add one of these positions to maintain that program. And so that's what that is. We added a halftime curriculum director. And that is related to the HR director 0.2 for 1 year, because we have our current curriculum, one of our current curriculum directors is 0.5. She'll move into a 0.6 FTE HR director next year. She'll split that time with our current HR director. Then she'll become full-time the following year. So this is a good transition into that role for her and for the district. It's a good transition out for our current HR director. And we'll keep his wisdom for 1 more year. And we hired an extra halftime curriculum director. So we now have a full-time curriculum director and what's a halftime position. That makes sense. That's a lot of words, but. Okay. This is the painful slide. Because this is going to be felt. And that's the last thing you want to do when you have a new levy. So on the certified staff side, we're reducing 5 elementary teachers. Elementary had our highest staffing levels, our lowest ratios by far. And that even takes into account the fact that we recognize that class sizes at elementary need to be smaller than they do at middle and high school. Our elementary schools have shrunk the most since the pandemic, and we just haven't really adjusted those staffing levels. And we had some really small classes this year that are just unsustainable for us. We dropped one of our pre-K programs, and so we're dropping a 0.5 pre-K teacher. Will only operate 2 of those. We had a music teacher leave their position, and so instead of hiring back a full-time music position, we'll hire back a 0.8 music position. And then we're losing 2 middle school teachers, so 7.7 total teaching staff. Teaching staff was largely spared during the last reduction cycle. We cut administrative staff and classified staff. And that's where the most room was this time. It wasn't about making those things even. That's just where there was positions left to cut. But nonetheless, these will be felt, and these are important and substantial.
When we passed the levy, we had talked about that the levy would allow us to not have to cut this long list of teachers. But even with the levy, which was passed in $1.50 and was a maintenance levy, we did include at some point we're going to need to adjust for the loss of 400 students enrollment. But that we could do it exactly like this, through attrition. No one's losing their job. These are all teachers that have retired or left the district. And instead of filling their positions, we've recalibrated, which is a much softer and less impactful on the quality of our schools. So indeed, just as we hope, the levy passed, and it has allowed us to adjust downward through attrition. And this is the first round of that. And hopefully there won't be another round, but there might be next year.
Would you say that this round is the worst or?
Gary?
You know, it's such an unknown next year with PERS rates going up by 2.5%. That's a significant chunk of money right off the top, and those are pretty much set. Those are not gonna change. So we're gonna need the legislature to come through for us, or we're gonna need our enrollment to grow, or both. And so we're really at the mercy of the legislature and kids moving into our school district. And so it's hard to say. If both go well, we'll be fine. If one goes well and the other one doesn't, it just kind of depends on, it's really hard to project.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, Gary, attrition can mean a lot of things. Do we know in the teacher certified category, is it mostly because teachers are retiring? Or
So
moving?
some retired, some moved, and some were temporary staff members who were filling in for a leave, and maybe the person didn't return from leave. We had a couple of those cases where a teacher took a leave for a year. A temporary teacher replaced that teacher, and the teacher who took the leave decided to not come back, and the temporary teacher just wasn't hired back. But they were hired on a 1-year contract. They weren't a permanent staff member.
And that's to echo Dr. Lyman, it's not an egregious quote-unquote layoff. And the other thing I was looking at to the right, you're gonna address the right, I mean, that is a bit alarming. The IAs for special ed.
It's a challenge, to be sure. 3 of those were in the budget but not hired. So the first 3 were not boots on the ground at all. They were in the budget, but we were never filled those positions last year. So what is a real reduction, though, is the 1.41 below. That's a full-time SPED IA and a part-time SPED IA, both of whom are retiring, and they're not being replaced this year. And so that is a challenge that we're actually taking a look at, because it's
There's a reality with special education, and that is that every one of those students has an individualized education plan which describes exactly the services they ought to receive. So when you're talking about a special education population, you are defining your staffing based on those IEPs, regardless of what your budget may say or may not say. So we are very dialed in to our director of special education's advocacy and needs for staffing as these children arrive with special needs. It's not, there's no conversation of a no, it's how are we going to fulfill the tenets of the IEP with the appropriate staffing. And it's just, that's always the way it's been. So that more than anything, the world of special education is not a hard and fast staffing number. It is always ebbing and flowing, as you see where you had the 3.0 not hired, yet they were there. So, you know, it's always a moving target.
And so they were not hired because we couldn't find someone in that position, or we just didn't meet the position.
Well, a little bit of both, yeah.
Well, some of it was we couldn't find them. Some of it was some miscommunication between HR and fiscal and the student services department about how many positions they actually had. And so there was a variety of factors mixed in there.
Those positions have been some of our hardest positions. We can't even find some.
The other thing that's worth noting is the 0.41 position in the SPED IAs through attrition, the 0.41 of that. Anybody who's less than 4.25 hours a day in our classified staff does not receive benefits. But there's a new law that passed in the legislature that can't hire a special education staff member and pay them less than 5 hours. So when that person retired, we couldn't replace her with a 0.41. It would have to be a 0.5 or higher, 5 hours or more than 0.5, and it would have put him into benefits. And so that's something we have to navigate too, is you just can't hire people for that many hours anymore. It's against the law.
So anyone who is a current .41. They can stay that way until they retire, like there's no grandfathering.
No, we would have to, she happened to retire before the law took effect.
Okay, so everyone.
And we've been moving that direction in preparation of this, and just in general, we can't retain. It's hard to retain people at 4.25 hours a day with no benefits. People will do it for a while, but it's a job that takes a lot of training and dedication. It's a really hard job, and so we've been trying to move to paying full-time with benefits because that's what makes the position financially feasible for people.
We did that.
We have a number of 4.25 hours minute IEs, but I think we only have one spend that would be.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when did that go into effect, that law? Is it
Next year,
For next year?
next year.
Our forecasted IEP students, do we know?
They seem to be going up, and since we put this budget together, they seem to be going up more.
So the math doesn't work, then, right? With less IAs, with more students, with more kids on IEP.
It's a challenge, to be sure. We did add some certified staff. We added, when you go back,
Gary, just a point of clarification on that point. So is every IEP student a SPED student, or is there a distinction?
every student on an IEP is considered to be in special education. And they have a wide variety of services that they require, from very intensive one-on-one services to much more to speech and language. Yeah, and it's all in the same category. But our numbers have been increasing across the nation, across the state, across the district for sure, and we're seeing it here without question. And the thing is we get an extra 1.0 weight for every special education student, but it's capped at 11% of our population. And so we're running over our 11% cap, as is everybody else. So every new special education student that comes in, there's no additional funding that comes with this. And that cap was put in place in '94. It hasn't been adjusted since, and I don't know of a district that's not over their cap, and so then that's just an additional cost pressure that squeezes. And there's students who really need the assistance. It's something we need to do, but it's a challenge, and it's one of the things we're hoping will be fixed in the funding formulas.
And reimbursement typically runs at like 30 cents on the dollar first.
So so that's a separate fund. That's called the High Cost Disability Fund. And so there's a separate fund for students that cost over $30,000 a year to educate. And we can submit all of our expenses over the $30,000, over and above the $30,000. We can submit those to the state for reimbursement. And for years and years, the grant was set so low, you got like 10% back. And the legislature stepped it up to $55 million about 4 years ago. And over the course of that 4 years, the reimbursements have gone from like 65 to 55, and we're at like 40.1% this year, getting reimbursed for those high cost students. And so that's another cost pressure on top of that. And some of those students are well in excess of $100,000 a year. And
Does that pool is growing? The pool of students who are driving, is that growing, or is it?
the pool is growing or staying the same, but the cost of providing those services is increasing. Not only with our costs, and the amount in the grant has stayed stagnant at $55 million at a time when we've just had a lot of inflationary pressures. And so I think that, and maybe the size of the pool, a lot of those students are also placed in outside placements because they have needs we just can't serve as well as somebody who specializes. And the cost of those placements has gone astronomically high.
And many have shut down around the state.
And many are shutting down. Yeah. And you can't even find a spot for kids. Yeah.
Just one other question on that one. So the SPED program this year under headcount target, what, 3 heads? How did the program run this year? Is it sustainable in the future to eliminate those 3 heads that they were gonna try to hire?
That's a good question. I would hope so. We'll have to watch it and monitor it. We're taking a look at it right now. We've had some more SPED students move into the district just since we passed this budget. And so we need to take a look at this. It's something we're watching. Part of the reason we took those 3 positions is because they weren't boots on the ground. They were in the budget, but they weren't people at work.
But the rest of the people that are in the SPED team, do they need those 3 people?
I think they would tell you they could use those 3 people.
And then,
I'm sure of
just
that.
One other question. So the 5 FTE on the elementary teacher side, what does that change from an average per classroom?
I think it takes us, I can get you that number next Thursday for sure, but I think it's like 23.5 to 25 on average. But so that's not spread evenly though, right? Because only 5 classrooms are impacted. So some will go from 16 to 24. And, some will go not be changed at all.
One last point, Sean, the sustainability of sped staff, like, is there? If students are underserved in that role, is there potential liability?
For sure.
And so that's probably something where.
Special education is incredibly litigious and we have to provide those services or we are certainly open to lawsuits.
It is a complicated staffing process, so our director, her team is kind of going through and, there's minutes that are required. And they're generally weekly minutes, and so she calculates all those minutes, and then you find bodies to go side by side those minutes, right? Like, based off of what service it is. And so she's in the process of seeing, when you say forecasting, you can't really forecast because you can never identify a student in advance of that initial IEP. And then the parent has to kind of accept the services, and that is a legal process in and of itself. And so it is challenging to forecast. You kind of wait and see who comes or who goes through that process. And so that's why it ebbs and flows, right? It's because you can't forecast necessarily for it. And then once that is done, then we get a much clearer picture of interest where what they need. And generally that is what it's need. And then you provide needs, so you have to do those, right?
So I'm gonna keep us moving forward because we're just about out of time. And I want to make sure we can start our next meeting on time. And we have another meeting a week from tomorrow. We can go more in depth on some of this stuff. I just wanted to give you a good overview tonight. So we do have some transfers going out of the general fund. This is actually a place, this is really important. You see those curriculum and technology fund, turf replacement fund, and the bus replacement fund. Those are all monies we're putting into reserves for future years to cover our capital expenditures that the bond funds are going to run out. Nutrition service and athletics, those are just numbers that we give to those funds to support those programs. That's just the district contribution to those. One good thing about these transfers is not only are we saving money for future years, but if we did find ourselves in a budget tight spot, if we needed to add some more staff, if our enrollment didn't show up, we could make these transfers in a smaller number or not make them at all if we had to. We'd have to just make up for it in future years, but it is a cushion within a one-year budget that is nice to have. There's other cushions as well, but this is one we have that we could tap into. There's our expenditure projection. Looking at a total of going up by 9%. It's really not that high because the contingency number on the bottom impacts that substantially. But you can see the line by line cost increases, and you can see the associated payroll cost of 9.78%. That's largely the unemployment cost affecting those benefits costs in a pretty substantial number there. This is something that Dr. Lyon mentioned, but I just want to make sure people are clear on that as we've lost students, we just haven't adjusted our staffing size. And that is a big part of the cause of our financial problems that we had, is that we just stayed at the same, we had less revenue and stayed roughly the same size for too long. We shrunk, we didn't shrink fast enough. And so we need to watch that really carefully. And we did talk about during the levy campaign. And I just think it's important for everyone to know we are in the first year of an economic recovery. Doubling your reserves to 3% of your revenues is a good thing, but you're still at 3% of your revenues for reserves. And we have to have a much higher number than that going forward. So even though the levy's been a great thing and has saved us from being in a horrible position and allowed us to offer really good service to our kids and families, we still need to improve the district's financial health and get to that 8% number. Just a timeline and updates. So this was the board and budget committee. This is the fiscal update. That top one is tonight, where you get an overview of the budget. Also linked to the budget, and I have a handout for each of you. are just some tables that kind of get into some more details of the budget. I wanted you to have a week to kind of look at those if you wanted to look at them and chew on them. If you have any questions between now and the next budget committee, and you feel like emailing me, that'd be great. Just, I can do some more homework. We have 18,000 account codes, so I might not know the answer right off the top of my head, but if you have some questions about it, feel free to shoot me one. I already have some I know you're gonna ask that I'll get after before you have a chance to ask them. And then we'll go through a week from tomorrow, review the budget in some more detail. If you all agree that it's a good budget, you can vote to approve it on that date. If not, we have a couple more meetings scheduled. And then, in a perfect world, the board adopts the budget on June 5th at their regular meeting. We have a budget hearing. And I am more than out of time, and I think Christine's probably wondering when I'm gonna be quiet, so she can go set up for the other meeting.
Can you send it out?
Yes, please. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's pretty fun.